Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this Tuesday. No gender-neutral people allowed. You have to declare a sex before listening to this show, and that sex has to be in correlation with your birth certificate. Okay, so we got the record straight on who can listen and who can't. Now, today I want to concentrate on J. Edgar Hoover, his connections to the Vatican. You know who he is, the FBI, old FBI director, the homosexual FBI director. He fits well. He fits really well with the Vatican, doesn't he? And you're going to be astounded by all these connections, because a long time ago, I had made so many connections between the formation of the CIA, the FBI, etc., and Georgetown University, the Jesuits, etc., and nothing has changed, even with our boy Trump in the office. And I say our boy because, let me make a comment first before I get into the J. Edgar Hoover story today. If you've been following the news, we are in deep trouble, folks. There's a two-tier justice system, and all of these, did you watch what happened to Roger Stone? He's one of these political activists, or longtime Republican, worked for Nixon, and that's okay. Everybody in America has a right to choose their political ideologies and support who they like. But when you see Gestapo tactics like went on in Germany prior to the Nazi takeover, you have to make the assumption that America is headed in the same direction. Roger Stone basically was charged with process crimes, and if you really look closely at the indictment, it had nothing to do with the Trump collusion charge, and that's not even a crime either. There's no connection yet to that. And this has been going on for 2 years. Millions are being spent by the Robert Mueller investigation, a special counsel. Like I said yesterday, he's the most powerful man in America right now. Nobody elected him. He can do basically what he wants because Trump put in a non-existent attorney general. And that was a plan, I think. And that's why I feel Trump is on their team as well, just playing the Hegelian dialectic. And I watch, people that have commented about the Roger Stone arrest. What they did, he's a white-collar guy. He's 66 years old. He's not a flight risk. The crimes he's being charged are process crimes. Nothing to do. They were basically he didn't remember some test emails or something, and they got him for lying to Congress and also witness tampering. So these charges are basically, I'm going to use the word chicken shit. If you're in the prosecutorial circles, if you're in a prosecutor's office, that's about what they would say. But that's par for the course, because he's not the first Trump associate in his campaign that has gone down. There's been, 30 or some indictments. 4 people have pled guilty. 7 people have been charged. And these are all the same kind of, I said yesterday, Andrew Weissman trumped up charges, just like he did with Arthur Anderson back almost 20 years ago. So we have the same going on. But what's happening now, folks, we're in deep trouble. Because what happened to Stone, even if you don't like him, and if you're a complete idiot and don't understand what they're doing on the Democrat or Republican side and still take a side and are a Democrat or a Republican, you have to say that what they did to him is basically, how can you say, the tip of the iceberg about what's to come, because it was a Gestapo tactic, an early morning raid with 29 armed SWAT team investigators. They even had 2 amphibious vehicles in the back of his house where there's a canal in Florida. He doesn't even swim, by the way. And it was just overkill. And they had contacted CNN to be there, which is really a crime as well. And it was just a show of Gestapo tactics. This is what they've done to the guy previously, Paul Manafort, that was arrested. And it's unheard of. But this is what was going on in Nazi Germany. So what do you think's going to happen in the future? This is a lead up to what I call the Vatican Jesuit-led takeover, fascist takeover of America, using socialism as a linchpin to get to their fascist New World Order. And that's why you see the onslaught of all of these young congressmen getting in, waving the socialist banner. And so did the recent Democratic hopeful for the presidency, who announced her presidency, Senator from California, Kamala Harris, wants to give away everything free. Free health care, free universities, no paying for education anymore. Where's it all coming from? They want to take your money and then use it. Can you imagine the federal government trying to run an educational program? They're dumbing people down now. Man, imagine what that would be? Incredible. So that's where we're headed. And the Roger Stone case is a perfect example of how the Justice Department is out of hand, how the FBI is taken over, like I said, by the Vatican. But this is nothing new. And let's go back now to former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. He's considered like, the father of the FBI. So in the initial stages. And just as the Vatican was instrumental changing the OSS with Pope Pius XII and a couple like Wild Bill Donovan and the others in Rome when they started the CIA, the Vatican has got their teeth into the FBI in basically a lockjaw manner. And this is nothing new. Now, I'm going to start out with something from Avro Manhattan's book, The Dollar and the Vatican, written in 1957. He said American Catholics, like Catholics the world over, would need not so much of the primitive lie detectors used by the American FBI in 52 as the elaborate, gigantic lie detectors of a future world dictatorship, to find out in all of its nastiest form the veritable hatred which those of them who are capable of political thinking nurse towards any form of true democracy, including the American. As far as other things are concerned, however, Catholics are the most honestly outspoken of all Christians, particularly when they feel cheerful. In those moments, they put their hearts in their hands and just let any heretic or indeed even miscreant have a good look. Then they can say anything, even the greatest of all truths, namely the one cherished for almost 20 centuries. That's determined to be wiped out by to wipe out all non-Catholics. An American hierarch and hence automatically an American super-patriotic teacher, who consequently would never dare to teach non-American principles, said something which, if the FBI had not been riddled with Catholics, might have made it somewhat concerned about the future of genuine American freedom of worship. And here's what you'd be interested. The Archbishop of Boston said this, quote, "We cheerfully concede the Catholic Church is engaged in a frankly avowed conspiracy to win America and the world for Christ, and therefore to convert all nations to Catholicism. To most Americans generally devoted to American democracy, such words would sound anything but American. But to the FBI, however, they sounded more American than anything else. This owing to one simple reason, namely, the most members of the FBI were Catholics or Catholic sympathizers. Hence words like those of Cushing, which meant wiping out all other religions, had been familiar to them from childhood. Familiarity breeds acceptance. Result, they came to identify such anti-democratic principles in Americanism as basically democratic. Not with the Americanism of most Protestants, liberals, and agnostics, to be sure, but with the Americanism of the American Legion, of the, not to mention that advocated by the secular bemedaled Knights of Columbus, which perhaps explains why the FBI followed the Second World War became so concerned about these Americans who, in veritable American fashion, scorned all imperialism with all of its pomp and tried to cherish the great principle of freedom for individuals, religions, and nations, the noblest and truest heritage of the founders of the United States of America. Let me make a point here. He leads up to this. There's a story about J. Edgar Hoover, and he was really given an honorary degree from Jesuit Georgetown University and was given the sword of Ignatius of Loyola. So the roots of the Vatican and the Jesuits go deep into the FBI since its formation. And it hasn't changed today. So when people are saying the FBI is tarnished, the justice system is broken, this is a orchestrated effort to do this from both the left and the right. What dismays me a little bit is when I listen to the mainstream. Of course, you're going to get the version of the fascist Democrats now. That's exactly what they've turned into. Fascist socialist Democrats. And the conservative Make America Great Republicans give their side of the story, and they constantly are fighting. Now, I can expect that from the mainstream. But when I go to the alternative and I look for stories, for example, I checked out a story. A guy did he calls himself the Alternative News, and he has many followers. I think on that one broadcast about Roger Stone, he had like 369,000 views. But he fails to understand this connection between the left and the right, as he basically was saying the deep state is trying to get Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump is the deep state. And it's similar to when you talk about this Vatican problem. Even 10 years ago, and I remember this story, and I'm kind of rambling on here, but it's worth it for a minute. That same analogy given by this guy yesterday about Roger Stone, which you can go read. I mean, he's got some good facts about all the indictments and everything that's going on. But the analysis falls short because even most of the alternative doesn't catch on to the fact that Trump is the deep state. And that he's just in there playing a part. He's an actor. I've went through this many times talking about the Emmy Award, the Emmys and all the, Oscars should also include the stage show going on in the White House and in Washington, because that's the biggest acting show of all time. And they have a sequel going on for decades. It's the longest running television show in the history of America. And we don't give them credit for being great actors. I really do. Trump's a great actor. Nancy Pelosi is a great actor. Better than the ones you see on TV. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this same analogy that's missed is also missed when you get to the Vatican critics and those supposed people who understand the true story. And I'm not saying that they don't understand parts of it, but they do the same thing. And let me give you an example. Alex Jones is a perfect example. 10 years ago, when I had contact with him, was on his show, etc., had my own radio show after his on Genesis, or before his, can't remember. I was a staunch critic of the Vatican, similar as I am today, saying there's no good at the higher levels of the Vatican. Well, at that point in his career for the CIA as a shill, he denounced everything that I said, and others like me, saying we're crazy. These are just old priests. The Vatican, he did not utter a word against them. And that was the plan. Now, fast forward to, last year or the year before. Recently, 15 years later, he calls Francis, and there's this evil side of the Vatican. So now we have the same thing going on in the Vatican that's going on in Washington, D.C. We have the good Vatican and the bad Vatican at the top, and he wants to get rid of the bad Vatican, being Pope Francis and certain other demonic people there. That's total wrong analysis, because they're all evil at the top levels. And if they're not, they're killed like Pope John Paul was before the cyanide salesman John Paul II was put in that chair, that demonic chair, that also sits empty with number 666 on it in the United Nations, waiting for the Antichrist to come. But anyway, so that even if you get information from Jones, I think you got to understand he works with them. He's made a lot of money. And as I said, everybody thinks he's Bill Hicks, but really I'm Bill Hicks. Now, see, that confuses everything. But, you have to understand that's what you're going to get from the media. People saying outlandish things like I just said. And then you get people that immediately say, well, you're discrediting yourself. No, I'm telling you what you're going to hear most of the time. And the way information is passed on today without verification, people don't know what to believe. And don't you think the Vatican-led New World Order uses that? So we have the Jones analysis, and then we have the alternative media's analysis of Trump and the fascist Democrats now, failing to understand exactly what they're doing. And in Jones's case, it's he's basically a willing shill, and that maybe some of these other people, I don't know because I don't know them, maybe they're unwilling and just not knowledgeable, or maybe they're willing. But the only reason I called Jones that is because I had personal contact and a lot of information years ago. And I can basically say, beyond reasonable doubt, that he is working with the CIA or whoever they are up at the top levels to pass on this false information on InfoWars. Okay, so we get back to J. Edgar Hoover and his connection to all these cardinals, all these bishops, when he was basically everybody, there was a recent movie about his homosexuality. He fits in well. But there are a lot of details about the relationship between J. Edgar Hoover and Cardinal Richard Cushing, that statement I just said. In the journal article written, the director and his eminence, the working relationship and questions of church and state as reflected in Cardinal Cushing's FBI files by James Garneau, Garneau. Quoting from Garneau, Cushing was appreciative and was quoted as having said, if I quote, J. Edgar Hoover is just like quoting the Pope. In 1964, the year when Hoover received his Sword of Ignatius Loyola, Cardinal Richard Cushing celebrated Hoover's 40th anniversary in the FBI and said, the most outstanding expression of, this is the Cardinal speaking now, the most outstanding expression of the level of sharing on the part of Cushing, however, was expressed when Hoover celebrated his 40th anniversary as director of the FBI in '64. For this occasion, and this is a quote about Cushing, Cushing arranged that 40 masses would be celebrated by the priests of the St. James Society in Latin America during a special period of 40 days of prayer set aside for the purpose of the cardinal. Okay, I've got looking at a photo of Hoover and Cushing at the FBI headquarters in Washington, February 4th, 1959. Okay? So there you have it, an initial connection, and I've got more here about Hoover. And we'll get to that in one moment. But going back to the history of what the Vatican is all about and the CIA and how they gather information and work together, you have to really also look at the CIA and their connection. So basically, it's just one big happy family. And did you know that I'm looking at a photo here now, and I mentioned this, Edgar Hoover was given an honorary law degree on June 5th, 1939, upon his occasion at Georgetown University. So Georgetown U gave him an honorary law degree in celebration of the adoption of the Constitution and founding of the university at the sesquicentennial convocation. J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, was today presented, that day, June 5th, 1939, with an honorary degree of law by the Reverend Arthur O'Leary, president of Georgetown. Incredible. And don't you think that there's connections between, well, who was the recent FBI director that was fired by Trump? James Comey. Now, don't you think Comey has a relationship with Georgetown as well? And every other FBI director? Now, what about the new guy that Trump is going to put in? A guy by the name of Bill Barr. Now, Bill was once he's now the Attorney General, excuse me. And I mean, whether you're the Attorney General or the head of the FBI, there's a connection to Georgetown. And so we'll see what Bill Barr does now. And I will lay $1 to a donut that he does nothing with the Hillary Clinton scams, because they're trying to shove it in America's face with this two-tier justice system. They're going after everybody that wants to make America great again, and the sovereignty of our country is being attacked. But they're leaving all of these blatant crimes done by Hillary and her group, which you can really document if you look into it, without even talking about it. The media doesn't talk about it. And the fascist socialist people, or you want to call them the Vatican-led deep state, that's their plan, to shove it in America's face to show you that you have no business being here unless you listen to what we tell you. What we tell you to do, what to think, you're going to have no rights of free speech. Right now, you can't even wear an America Great hat again. I heard a guy went in with an America Great t-shirt, and he couldn't, in the gym he worked out, they wouldn't let him in with it. These kids that were wearing that Make America hat, that red hat, you're not allowed to wear that. So pretty soon you're not going to be allowed to say anything. And that's what politically correct is all about. Now, what happened in September 23rd, 1964 with J. Edgar Hoover? And you tell me there's no connection to the Vatican, right? To the FBI, CIA, Hitler, Bush, whoever you want to talk about. They're controlling this whole world scheme, and you're the pawn, and I'm the pawn in this game. Now, on September 23rd, 1964, J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, was named today the first recipient of the Sword of Loyola Award at Loyola University of Chicago. So he receives the Sword of Ignatius Loyola. And guess what he got? A reproduction of the sidearm of St. Ignatius Loyola is to be given annually to a person of a national or international prominence who exhibits to a high degree the qualities of courage, dedication, and service. I wonder we should find out exactly who's gotten this award. It's given out annually. Was it suspended? They don't talk about it, but this is an award given the Sword of Ignatius to do the same damn thing he did, and that's cut off the heads of any heretic or Protestant that doesn't follow the Pope and Romanism. That's what the qualities of courage, dedication, and service are about. And every FBI director since has followed in that command. So you're going to get no justice in this country. Mr. Hoover has headed the FBI for 40 years. They don't mention he's a homosexual. I wonder, like I said, he fits well into the pedophile world of the Vatican, doesn't he? Right there. Okay, we're going to come back in, 3 minutes, talk a little bit more about J. Edgar Hoover and other little Vatican tidbits that you might not have heard about on the greatest show on earth that nobody listens to because of the Jesuit command does not allow this information out to the public, on the Investigative Journal. Back in 3 minutes.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app, for all of your mobile devices. Streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, back for the second half hour, and I want to finish up a little bit with J. Edgar Hoover and his connection to the Jesuits and the Vatican connection to the FBI. And for those of people out there who are misinformed, they would say something like, well, so what? The Vatican is a Christian organization. It's good that they work together, isn't it? Well, what happened to the separation of church and state? What happened to people reading history and understanding? When J. Edgar Hoover received the Sword of Loyola in 1964, did you know that was a replica of the sword that Loyola took into battle against Protestants and the Protestant Reformation? And that's why they were formed, to kill and to bring back again control for the Roman Empire. So basically, they're doing the same thing now, just they're taking the whole world. And if you look around, it's working out pretty well for them. America is probably one of the last countries that really, where you got a semblance of freedom and sovereignty. Look what's happening in Europe. Look what's going on in Central, South America, Africa. And they're taking that away from you right now because they want it all. So here we have Hoover at a $250 a plate dinner getting this award from Loyola. And my God, there's many more I can tell you. And what about my shows about the Red Mass? Oh, that's a real interesting ceremony that John Paul II was honored and put into, the halls of Congress put out a resolution about the Red Mass. And you know what that is? Boy, the patron saint of the Red Mass was none other than the biggest inquisitor in England. Yes. And you can look up his name. I'll let you do a little homework. And every year when the Supreme Court opens, they have a red mass, no matter if you're Catholic or not. Everybody in the big cities and in Washington, they go to the Catholic Church, the cardinals are there, and they celebrate the opening of the Supreme Court. Isn't that amazing? In a country that's supposedly a separation of church and state. Look up the red mass. It's quite interesting. And the patron saint was none other than one of the biggest inquisitors known to the world at the time. But when people don't understand this history, they look and say, well, so what if James Comey is involved with the Jesuits? They're a good, wholesome organization. Look at their basketball teams, Georgetown, and look at all the other ones, Loyola and Gonzaga, whatever. They're such great people. It's good they're involved. But behind the scenes, folks, this is an organization that is working to take away your freedom. And right now, in front of our very eyes, we're seeing it happen with what's going on with the FBI and the Justice Department. And you have commentators on Fox, mainstream, saying there is no justice in America. The system is broken. They're telling you what they're going to do. When you have a broken system, you have another system come into place, and that system will be fascist socialism, which the Democratic Party is taking on, telling you right now who they are. So that's the fight. That's where we're at. And I'm telling you, my show yesterday on the two-tier justice system talked a little bit about it as well. So, let me give you a few more little tidbits today to end the show regarding some Vatican Jesuit connections to our country that you may have forgotten about. Okay, I'm not going to get to all of these little tidbits about the Vatican, the Jesuits today, but let me highlight them and then come back tomorrow and we'll get into them more in depth, especially this one. CIA documentation, which was declassified in 2007, made a claim that Allen Dulles met with Heinrich Himmler. Okay. And you have to look at the Dulles family, the connection to Fordham University, etc. We're also going to look at George H.W. Bush's remarks at the 1992 Knights of Columbus Convention. Oh, that should be interesting. And what about this one? This is a great one. President Harry Truman, I'm just giving you a few, received an honorary degree from Jesuit Fordham University in 1946. And he spoke there. It'd be interesting to see what he said. And there's no connection between the Vatican? Come on. We have to get into a story that I love based on how Romanism is built on forgeries. But for now, you've probably forgotten about this. But I've harped on this show many times regarding the Vatican Jesuit connection to the killing of Abraham Lincoln, which is overlooked by many of our scholars and great filmmakers who somehow don't even bother to read the court testimony when Lincoln, before Lincoln was president, when he represented a Father Chiniquy, who was charged falsely by the Jesuits of rape, because he was an outstanding critic of the Vatican back during that period of time, showing how many of the cardinals and bishops in America basically were saying their goal is to overthrow this country. Yeah, but they're allowed to live here. They don't pay taxes. And that's basically because the Vatican, are the richest organization in the world. And you know where politicians, they go, the Vatican's like a bee, the hive, and the politicians are like the bees, the worker bees. And there's that queen bee, the Pope, sitting right there in that hive, controlling them all. But did you realize that after the Lincoln assassination, and I mean, I don't know how many times I've said this, and it seems to go in one ear and out the other. We broke off diplomatic relationships with the Vatican, formal relationships. And it wasn't until 1984, on January 10th, that the UN ambassador to the Vatican was again recognized and established full diplomatic relations, and that was the first time in 117 years that the United States established full diplomatic relations with the Vatican. Presidential action followed, voting by Congress to repeal the 1867 law that prohibited the expenditure of federal funds on a diplomatic mission to the Holy See. Prior to the nomination earlier this year of William A. Wilson as U.S. ambassador to the Vatican by President Reagan, it was under Reagan's watch, except for a 20-year period from 1848 to 1867, there has been no official diplomatic representative of the United States government to the Vatican. To be sure, during the past 45 years, several American presidents have from time to time named individuals as their personal representatives or envoys to the Vatican, but all of these have served without compensation or the appropriation of funds by Congress in carrying out their mission. Since these individuals did not enjoy diplomatic rank as official representatives of the U.S., in the wake of this new development in U.S. relations with the Vatican, it's important to review history a little bit, which is something people don't like to do, because you might just read the truth. And boy, that would be very unsettling, wouldn't it? Might screw up your whole world. And might screw up your New World Order plans, or your Vatican-led New World Order plans. Why don't we call it the Jesuit World Order? The Jesuit Vatican World Order. Why don't we call it what it really is? Now, this has long been, not everybody was happy when this happened in 1984. And basically, this subject of the United States ambassador to the Vatican has long been a source of bitter debate and divisiveness in American church and state relations. And as early as 1779, John Adams wrote the Continental Congress that he hoped it would never send, he's quoted, never send a minister to His Holiness or receive a Catholic nuncio into this country. Almost 70 years later, upon the recommendation of President James Polk, and after intensely heated arguments in the Congress, legislation was passed appropriating funds, authorizing the president to send a representative to the Papal States in Italy. Because basically back then, before that, like I said, look what Adams said. Now, prior to 1870, of course, the Roman Catholic Church maintained a territorial existence in the Papal States of Central Italy. And during this period, the Pope exercised temporal as well as spiritual sovereignty over these Papal States. That was, if you're familiar with Rome, that was Central Italy, Umbria, and Rome, and Romagna, they called it. This territory, ruled over by the Pope, covered an area of approximately 16,000 square miles, extending from the Adriatic and had a population of more than 3 million. The action taken earlier this year in appointing an ambassador to the Vatican is quite unlike the diplomatic representatives of the United States to the Papal States more than a century ago. At that time, instructions from the State Department to the nation's first charge of affairs to the Papal States stated this: "There's one consideration which you ought always to keep in view in your intercourse with papal authorities. Most, if not all, the governments which have diplomatic representatives at Rome are connected with the Pope as the head of the Catholic Church. In this respect, the government of the United States occupies an entirely different position. Furthermore, American representatives to the Papal States were explicitly restricted to civil relations and to the extension of commerce between the two countries. No representatives of the Papal States, it should be noted, were correspondingly sent to Washington during the 2 decades of American official representation with those Papal States." Okay. In a similar manner, 20 years earlier, after bitter debates in Congress, the charge was terminated in 1867, when a Congress refused to appropriate any more funds to the American ministry to the Vatican. Can you imagine? They weren't giving a penny to them. Now look what they got. They give the Vatican everything. Now, so we have this going on. Now, we have, with the final absorption of the Papal States into the Kingdom of Italy in 1870, so Italy took over again. The Catholic Church was without territorial existence and became a government in exile. Until what? 1929, Vatican City, through the Lateran Treaty and the Concordat with Mussolini, they carved out Vatican City, that small little country in the middle of Rome. Now, the absence of either diplomatic or quasi-diplomatic ties between the states and the Holy See continued until 1939, from 1867, when Franklin D. Roosevelt, a great Vaticanite, appointed Myron C. Taylor as personal representative of the President of the United States to His Holiness, guess what? Hitler's mentor, Pope Pius XII. Although Taylor carried this rank of envoy extraordinary, the administration specifically declared that his appointment did not constitute the inauguration of formal diplomatic relations with the Vatican. An Episcopalian, Taylor served through the Roosevelt years and for 2 years of the second term of Harry S. Truman for a total of 10 years. So I'm giving you just a little bit of history here, because when I say I made the blanket statement that there was no diplomatic relations, since the Lincoln assassination, approximately, and when Reagan came into office, basically formal. Now they're just declaring it formal. It gets more open and open and open as they get stronger and stronger and stronger. It's that idea of when you don't have control, when you are a minority, you act like a sheep. You act and you follow along. But once you start gaining power, you start getting like the wolf, stronger and stronger and stronger until you devour everything. And that's really the goal of the Vatican, the Jesuits today. And they used people like Roosevelt, like Hoover, both President and Harry Truman, etc., as their political pawns, working for them. Whether they are Protestant, Jewish, Catholic, it doesn't matter. Now, as we move on, when this happened, let me give you an idea here. There were reactions. Let's go to the reactions of the Protestant leaders. The appointment of Taylor as his first presidential envoy to the Vatican, this came on in 1939. A few months after the outbreak of World War II, relations between the U.S. and Italy were strained, and war between the two nations was imminent. As President Roosevelt explained the appointment, Mr. Taylor was sent to Rome to assist parallel endeavors for peace and alleviation of suffering. Oh, come on. That was the connection. Why did they wait so long before all, we could have gotten involved and prevented Hitler from killing 6 million or many more Jews and Stalin and all this, but they didn't want to. This is orchestrated. Mr. Taylor was there to make sure that things were running smoothly according to the Jesuit world order plans. And that's basically what happened. So we have this connection. I mean, it goes on and on. And let me give you some more here in just a second. Building on this story of, the diplomatic relations, whether formal or informal, between our country and the Vatican. Okay, this appointment of an ambassador to the Vatican, which was formalized under Reagan, had a history that goes back even farther than Reagan. So let's look a little bit at that, because it's an important document and important information. But if you look back to the other presidencies, Vatican has always had their influence here. And it's been a slow move to basically get people to accept it. And they had to have leaders in the Protestant evangelistic world as well as the Jewish community to accomplish this. Basically, papal knights working as ministers of Protestantism. Yes. fronting for the Vatican. But after the first meeting, the post of ambassador to the Vatican to Charles P. Taft, a member of the General Board of the National Council of Churches and a former president of the Federal Council of Churches who declined, President Truman submitted to the Senate the name of General Mark Clark for confirmation as full ambassador to the Vatican. Opposition to the move was overwhelming, and several months later Clark withdrew his name. So now, through Truman, who was a Vaticanite, they're testing the waters in that period of time. And throughout the administration of Dwight Eisenhower, another Vaticanite, selected to be the head of the head general in World War II by none other than, you'll see, close connections to Georgetown and high-level Georgetown figures like Father Edmund Walsh. The issue of an American representative of the Vatican remained dormant. A bill introduced in 1959 by Representative Victor Elfuso of New York, a Roman Catholic, calling for the immediate establishment of diplomatic relations with the Vatican, failed to receive support in Congress. Can you imagine that now? Come on. Almost simultaneously, Senator John F. Kennedy, not president yet, John was still alive until he backstabbed them, that he said this: "I am flatly opposed to the appointment of an ambassador to the Vatican. Whatever advantages it might have in Rome, and he's not convinced of these, they would be more than offset by the diverse effect at home." But with the election of Kennedy as president in 1960, the issue remained dormant during the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. They were too busy, getting rid of Kennedy than fighting this crazy war in Vietnam. The issue of the U.S. representative to the Vatican revived on June 5, 1970, with the announcement of Richard Nixon's appointment of Henry Cabot Lodge, also an Episcopalian, as his personal emissary to the Vatican. While Lodge was given no formal title, the White House declared that when we meet with the Pope, he will be representing President Nixon and the U.S. government. According to Nixon's White House press secretary, the president felt that it was important to have continuing contact with the Holy Father. Oh, really? A major spiritual and moral leader with wide-ranging contacts around the globe. Oh, that's for sure. That is for sure. At least they tell you the truth. He had wide range, it's a global organization. They don't tell you behind the scenes what they're really talking about. So, Nixon was a Vaticanite too. Now, Nixon was a Republican, right? And the Democrats, if you remember, made him resign because of the Watergate scandal. And that was a great acting job as well. I mean, that should have gotten the Academy an award for the best political motion picture of the year. But again, Hollywood failed to even honor these great actors and this great screenplay that was written by the Jesuits. Yes, they don't get any credit for writing anything anymore. They just do it behind the scenes. They're happy and they're humble men, right? Now, guess what? We have, fast forward Donald Trump. So we have this constant changeover, Democrat, Republican in the White House. They're all the same. I can honestly say if Trump is not Jesuit controlled, then my goodness, everything I've said in the past is wrong. And I don't think so. Now, he said it's important to contact him. Now, the appointment of Henry Cabot Lodge was made during the Vietnam War, in which the Roman Catholic Church was deeply involved because of its important role in Vietnam. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? What was their role? They wanted to kill off all the bourgeois. President Gerald Ford retained Lodge as his personal representative of the Vatican. Did it end with the Democrats? Oh, hell no. Remember who was next? We got that Jimmy Carter. I did an interview with Carter's his mother, Miss Lillian, if you remember her. I spent a day with her doing an interview. Interesting. She showed me pictures of Jimmy when he was a kid, told me all about how he really was when he was 10 years old. and invited me to their peanut farm anytime I was coming through Georgia. Well, anyway, President Jimmy Carter, appointment of an envoy to the Vatican, revived the church-state issue again. In the minds of many, far less justification for the appointment at that time than in previous administrations, beginning in 1939, that had named a representative to the Vatican. In those administrations, the actions were taken during times of war and sustained because of dramatic international crisis. Both conditions were lacking during Jimmy's first year in office at the time of his appointment of a personal representative to the Vatican. So there you go. He's got one. Democrat, Republican makes no difference. During the Carter presidency, for the first time, the Roman Catholic Church was directly involved in the appointment of a presidential representative to the Vatican. Up until that day, the appointment of David Walters, a Miami attorney, the White House would neither confirm nor deny to the press Carter's appointment of a representative to the Vatican. Meanwhile, the National Catholic News Service, which had been waiting for a week to release the story, disclosed in their announcement that the president's appointment of Walters had been cleared with the president of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Joseph Bernardin of Cincinnati, according to Russell Shaw, Secretary for Public Affairs of the United States Catholic Conference. Shaw further revealed that Walters was recommended on the personal level for the Vatican post by Terence Cardinal Cook of New York and Archbishop Coleman Carroll of Miami. So now we got the bishops making decisions for the president on who they want as their representative. So, they're working. Who's going to deny they work together? And he said the reason for this is that the concern of the government of the United States for the 771 million Roman Catholics throughout the world. So now it's, $1 billion? Primarily for the individual member of the church rather than the ecclesiastical structure itself. So, who is going to deny there was really any connection? See you tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.